Leah?
May I suggest that we have an IRWM plan,
Yes, yes.
and we have a whole section that was developed by the Upland and Forest Work Group.
Mhm.
And we have a lot of studies and literature search and a lot of
Mhm.
recommendations in there, and we would hope that you have a chance to look at that.
Yes.
And a lot of the parties that develop that are some of the big forest management entities in our region, including the national forest, but the privates as well.
Yeah.
And that's our story to
Yeah.
start with,
Yeah.
and, you know, please look at it when you have a chance.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the plan. I think I provided some feedback on the climate section back when you did your first round.
But this is the work groups.
The work groups?
The
Okay.
Upland and Forest Work Group did a lot of work, and it's
Great.
like a 90-page report.
Sure.
Please plow through it.
Yeah, let's chat more about that. Thank
Okay,
you.
good, thanks.
And the other thing is was it Gary Freeman for PG&E is showing that, well, precipitation may remain about the same, it's less snow, but there's missing water, right? It's
He's the first person to flag that, as you know.
750,000 acre feet.
Mhm.
You know, everybody's saying, you know, I'll echo Rick, it's in the vegetation in the trees. The forest has grown up and it's drawing a lot of water. And of course, it's not going into the state water
Sure, yeah. you see-
project as
yeah.
a result.
You see historical photos and there's a lot more things down here.
So that's a forest management issue.
Yeah. And that's one of the resource management strategies from the water plan that we're really interested in, forest management and how that can potentially change water supply downstream, things like that.
Yeah, we quote Gary, and we go on and on, so please have at it.
Yes.
Well, just another addition to
Yeah.
that potentially is we are in a granitic fractured area, and we continue to have earthquakes that are going to also need more fracturing and loss of water in that way.
Mhm.
So looking at the forest or vegetation management as well as,
The
if
geology.
there's still another gap, then.
We have lots of
what else-
geologists like Pat, so
Mhm.
we're interested in that.
And one of the focuses of the tribal communities has been really looking at the streams as headwaters and the changes in the streams over time, partially for that purpose of increased fractures and loss of water.
Yeah. So, you're kind of developing on how to do the outreach and stuff, so I'm here to get your ideas, get your guys' email addresses, communicate that way first, go from there.
A
Thanks for
good point
having
of
us.
contact is on
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the, some of the directors and executives in UFR, they're asked us to use the IRWMs more to our advantage, so go out and do a lot more outreach than we had to. So thank you. No questions?
More questions?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to
Yeah, I mentioned
more
also.
one-on-one outreach.
I brought some of we do a hydroclimate report every year, and it talks about some of those long-term trends I mentioned, so I'll leave it back there if anybody's interested. So it's a suite of indicators like temperature, precipitation, runoff, snowpack, it's all in here. We put this together because the data is in all different directions, so we brought it all into one report. So the goal of this report is to update it every year and to see how measured the measured data, what the measured data is the empirical data saying. And this isn't based on climate models, which we use those too, but this is actually the actual measured data, the streams and the temperature gauges. And so brought a bunch of these, so grab one if you're interested.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And if you would give Uma one of your cards,
Yeah.
so she has all your contact information, then as things develop, if anybody needs to get in touch with you, they'll be able to get your contact.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Number 3, disadvantaged community and tribal involvement project. And I see Jonathan's
You made it just in time.
Hi, Jonathan. Another beer, huh?
Shall we try it? Shall I go up there?
Yes, sir.
Doesn't matter, okay.
That would be good.
So thanks. I've been here for a while. I think Lauren's been here. I may have a map. Again, Jonathan Kusel's here, Institute for Community and Environment. Good to see a number of you. It's been a while. I wanted to just give you an update where we are at, and you folks probably are saying it was light years ago that we actually came and did the workshop and had conversations about this because you guys were the pilot. I'm happy to say we've gone through all the workshops. We had trials and tribulations to actually do all the workshops this winter. One of them it took us 3 times through the weather to actually get everybody together to make it happen. That was March, that was the last workshop. That allowed us to finish all the community assessment work and the boundaries, which then allows us to do a final analysis. So that's way more, yeah, let's do that. Just open that up, please. And just go to 1 here, number 1. It's big. I might take a moment. So this just gives you a sense of, I'll just block one person here, more or less. This is the community capacity assessment. And remember the assessment that we're doing, the disadvantage in community and tribal involvement, disadvantaged community and tribal involvement program involves us doing the entire IRWM Mountain Counties funding area. So 9 IRWMs in all. Apologies for the repeat, most of you know that. So what we did is made sure that we had the map right for all the individual communities. We then went and held workshops in all of the IRWM areas, and then we had capacity assessment done with folks, and some of you participated in this region's assessment. So this is a community capacity assessment, and yeah, what a surprise. The redder ones are lower capacity, and a couple ways of thinking about capacity is just the ability of a community. I won't go through all the definitions and so forth, but it's the ability of a community to respond to internal and external stresses. It's the ability also of communities to adapt to climate change too. And there's a lot of dimensions to that. So now that we have this, our next level of analysis, there's 2 places, two focus areas for this: community capacity and then socioeconomic status. So we're now collecting the data, and we should have it done in a week or 2. All those data for socioeconomic status, which will be an overlay. So if you go to number 2.
Can you point out where Plymouth is? Wait.
I got a slide that'll show you even more.
Okay.
So what this does, again, one of the important elements of this is to identify disadvantaged communities because there's a prioritization of funding for them. So we're doing this to say, here's a capacity assessment, Plymouth being up here, and then this has an overlay of essentially DWR's, their income-based determination. And we're not going to quibble with the income base. The point is you can use both, either. And so we're adding this 3rd layer that's a little bit more complex in terms of socioeconomic status. It's going to deal with poverty measures, families receiving public assistance, home ownership, and a couple of other variables, education levels that will be brought in this is a peer-reviewed process that was done a number of years ago in the Sierra Nevada Ecosystem Project. So next slide, please. So this gives you a better sense of the northern Sierra region and Upper Feather River, but I thought this was also really quite revealing. This workshop in this area took place 2.5 weeks or so before the campfire. And of course, they called it out, they said they were concerned about it, and they said, yeah, we're really, really worried about egress issues. And we've all known about these egress issues for a long time. But what this says is their inability to really address that, and also underscores their challenge in terms of dealing with the crisis that they're currently facing. So this came out of the workshop prior to the fire. And so what a surprise, they're struggling to deal with it. Not that anybody could deal with the magnitude of that problem simply, But that fire hit probably the lowest capacity area in the entire Sierra region of the Mountain Counties funding area. So it underscores the challenge that they're facing. So I thought it would be interesting to at least share a little bit of this with you. Now, know again that what we're going to do for each of these communities, and the reason they look goofy, in particular, a community like this, is because that's where the block group boundaries are. And for those who are in the workshop, you know that sometimes the block group boundaries don't work so well. But what the block group boundaries give us are good socioeconomic data, so we make a trade-off. And a lot of communities do work okay in terms of the boundaries. So, was that number 4? Oh yeah, there's one other one. And I know this will interest a number of you, and I think I've showed it before. It's also why what we're doing is so darn important, is because here's the CalEnviro screen for the area. There's no problems whatsoever in terms of overall disadvantaged communities because of the way they assess it. It's why this effort is really quite important, because we all know from the CalEnviro screen standpoint, there's no disadvantaged communities virtually in the entire Sierra area, including these areas. So it shows you the problem with that methodology, which I won't go into more, but this is somewhat of an antidote to that, and it also helps other agencies understand why they can't rely on this, particularly when they're dealing with forest communities throughout the state. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that. Know that the next step, within a couple weeks, we'll have a populated map of both socioeconomic status and capacity. So one of the things that also slowed us down, Lauren Miller, whom I know some of you met and participated in the workshop. Lauren left, she's on to another position in Colorado. We just hired Tracy Ruska, finishing up a PhD at UC Berkeley. He'll be joining us and he'll be a lead on this particular project, working very closely with me. And we're also now moving on to talking about technical assistance. So we can put the lights on, we can leave that up for a moment, but folks would just, perfect, thank you. So we're also bringing the group, the disadvantaged community representatives, back together to talk about how do we deal with the funding for both disadvantaged communities, technical assistance, and moving forward. That's kind of the next step. Before I even mention more about that, Trina, do you want to share anything regarding tribal outreach and engagement? Trina's been working with us on that and is continuing efforts in that regard. If you have anything you want to add to what I've said in terms of our community outreach and engagement and tribal.
Yeah, so we've conducted tribal workshops in the Mountain County funding area, also in almost every community. The California Indian Environmental Alliance was taking a lead on that, and they aren't working in the Mountain County funding area anymore, and so we recomprised a team which consists of myself, Dirk Charlie from the Southern Sierra, and Jody Monahan, who's been working with us all along and is also part of working with Liz, the Sierra Water Work Group. And so it's been an incredible process, and there's all different levels of dynamics of community participation in tribal communities, and so that outreach has been it's been arduous, but pretty fulfilling also. And a lot of the needs really looking at this, there's similarities between tribal communities and like disadvantaged communities. And so there's some incredible similarities, and then there's also the potential, because tribes do have access to some resources that other communities don't. And so looking at bundling and partnering projects together as we're looking at needs assessment and going into technical assistance, we're finding a lot of interest from the general community in working with tribes in different ways and vice versa. So that's been really awesome to help actually make some of those connections.
So Sierra Institute's been taking a lead on doing the socioeconomic assessment, capacity assessment with folks that Trina mentioned. Trina and Dirk are working and taking a lead with sort of tribal assessment. And a critical component, another dimension of this, is water and wastewater needs assessments to identify where some of those resources that are dedicated to this region. And I will also say, well, I'm not going to mince words here, in that of the 9 groups, 8 of them said, hey, we're happy to work together. We'll work on bundling projects and doing things that can make a difference for all of us. One of them has said, we don't like this process, we don't want to play. And that's the Cabby region, the one with the largest population. And so one of the challenges that we've been facing is that when you first look at the funding for this whole process across the state, it's population-based. It's not problem-based, it's not service area-based, it's not water production, but fill in the blank. It's just based simply on a population model. We all know particularly well that that doesn't work relative to the scale and scope of the issues that we're wrestling with up here. So the groups in the Mountain County's funding area said we should think differently about it. Here's the interesting thing. Department of Water Resources has said, we want to be open to different processes. They're trying not to tell the groups what to do, but in a sense, by default, they're kind of pushing the groups into either a competitive format or saying we've got to come up with some other ways. But there's also an opportunity here. And the opportunity is said, come up with a different formula. Not that it'll automatically be advanced, but come up with a different formula which could involve beneficiaries. So in the Upper Feather River watershed, we know that there's 20+ million people, so if you start counting beneficiaries, it changes the way we look at it. We can also talk about volume of water. We can add in a number of variables and come up with a formula that's different than population-based. And this came from a conversation with some lead officials in DWR. So we've been, maybe invite would be too strong a word, but at least offered the opportunity to propose something a little bit different in the context of the Mountain County's funding area. So we're gonna push that a little bit. We're gonna talk with the groups about that opportunity. Second, another major opportunity, we've said the money, because as far as the whole state's concerned, you may have seen the slide before that has the amount of money. Bay Area has roughly $50 million. We have 13.1. We know that's not gonna go very far with 9 integrated regional water management groups stemming from the Southern Sierra up to this area. We just know it's not going to go very far. So we've already started some conversations since the groups have said, with the exception of Cabby, the groups have said, we want a bundle. So one idea was the whole issue of water tanks. And so we are exploring that idea, and without overstating anything, there may well be an opportunity to fund some water tanks in each of the integrated regional water management areas, particularly if they're disadvantaged communities or there's a particular need, through funding other than DWR. So we've had a conversation with the state, and there may be some opportunities, and so we're going to pursue that in part because the Sierra Institute, Sierra Water Work Group, we are committed to looking at other avenues since we know 13.1 million is inadequate. We'll never get all the money. I think projects that IRWM has, the Upper Feather has identified, what, $1 billion or something like that. We won't come up with that much. But if we can start getting additional funding, and the reason is, I think everybody knows that the state is actually they've committed $1 billion to forest restoration. And the state, I don't think I'm overstating it by saying they're challenged to figure out all the avenues through which they might invest that money into good proposals. So we'd love to help them come up with some good avenues to expend some dollars on need, and so that's what we're doing. And so DWR did not ask us to do that, but the groups have been supportive and saying, we've got to find some additional dollars. And so as we identify all of the different water and wastewater needs, we've also recognized this issue of blending forest issues tightly like this group has done. The other groups have not done it to the extent that this IRWM has done it. But as they listen to Feather River folks talk about it, as they listen to us collectively make this connection, I think we're going to get some more purchase with it. And again, I don't want to overstate, say, yeah, funding's in the bag, we got it covered, no problem. The groups have to come together, and we will do that. And that's a call that we're going to have hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that's kind of
How are we going to deal with Cabby? I mean, they want it all, right? They decided that,
Cabby has about, depending on what day I count, I think it's about 54% of the population. So how are we collectively going to deal with Cabby? I think that One, Cabby has said they don't really acknowledge this process or respect it and don't really want to participate. And two, they're not terribly interested in the bundling idea. So if we happen to come up with $5 or $10 million and bundle it together, say on water tanks alone, we've now almost equal, what, 80% of the money that's allocated in this process, and we'll keep going for more. And Cabby said, we don't want to bundle. Okay. So how are we going to deal with them? We're sending them a letter. We talked about it at one point, I think it was a March 20th call, and we were told that Cabby doesn't want to play and they don't want to bundle. So in a sense, they've made it easy for us. And then there's this issue of how do we deal with the funds within DWR? And DWR can say, well, if you guys go to a competitive framing of it, then maybe we just open it up and it all is competitive funding based. We're trying to avoid that, quite honestly.
Groups that have agreed to bundle and work together.
DWR has said, given the charter of the 9 IRWMs in the Mountain County's funding area, that we can do 1/9, 1/9, 1/9 based on the disadvantaged community dollars, which is 10% of the $13 million, which means $1.3 million can go 1/9, 1/9, 1/9, and that's not very much. I know that's not what you're talking about. I'm just telling you how it got interpreted. So we're looking at, and also there'll be a discussion of changing the charter of the group. Because we also said in that initial charter that if 7 of the 9 groups agree, that's how it will go forward. So if, I think 8 of the 9 groups agreed to, for the disadvantaged community funds to go 1/9, 1/9, so the fact that Cabby didn't go along with it, it didn't stop that decision from going forward. So DWR basically interpreted that as saying, yes, you can do that with that portion of the funding, but you can't do it with all of it. But they haven't said exactly how that has to play out. Does that mean that 54% of the remaining dollars automatically go to Cabby? That hasn't been said either. But one could go by default to that. But that's why I said there's this opportunity to begin looking at an alternative formula. Do we need 9 out of 9 to do that? That's unclear too, which is why there's going to be this discussion of the charter. So we're kind of stuck in some places there, which is also why I said, well, we can get stuck till the cows come home, or we can bundle projects and see if we can't come up with some more money and solve some of the issues, or at least begin to address it. We also think bundled approaches may be way more competitive anyway. So if it devolves into a whole competitive process, we've got bundled projects. We think that those will fare really well. So that's another way of dealing with Cabby, if you will. And maybe if we get some funding for water tanks, Cabby might suddenly decide that maybe bundling is not such a bad idea after all, and maybe working with the other groups. I can't speak for them. I wouldn't bet on it. But if we can get some additional resources, frankly, I'd love to dramatically increase the $13 million total. So we're not fighting over the small amount that it is. We're actually working together to identify how we can secure additional funds. And frankly, I think that has the potential to go a long way.
What is Cabby?
Consume this, American Bear, and the Yuba.
And
It is those 4 watersheds and the big population: Nevada, Placer, El Dorado. Yeah, thank you.
And what are the water tanks? Are they for water storage for drinking water? Or
Could be for drinking water, fire protection, but also that would be functional without electricity when the electricity goes down. So you have some